Okay, so this is a video game review for Destroy All Humans for the PlayStation 2. This game was released in 2005, is also available on the Xbox, and shows off the capabilities of the console's hardware a long way through its lifespan. This was one of those games I didn't get around to playing upon release, but I always was intrigued when I saw adverts for it, and its seemingly light-hearted take upon an alien invasion, combined with a bright, colourful veneer. It appealed to me, and is why some years later I dipped into it to see if it was as fun as I thought it would be. The purpose of the game is to lead the alien invasion of the Furon Empire against the United States, aka the world. While the game appears at first glance to be a sandbox game, it's mission-based and has a completely linear storyline. You play as Cryptosporidium 137, who has a lust for destruction, and you'll visit roughly 6 US towns or cities throughout the course of the game, gathering DNA, the purpose of the Furon's visit, indoctrinating human settlements, and wreaking carnage when all else fails. To begin with, you land in a farming settlement where you're given a tutorial on how to control crypto. The controls are fairly well mapped, though are probably not well suited to easy pickup by quote-unquote casual gamers, as there are many actions to perform during the game. For instance, you can lift objects and people off the ground with your psychokinetic abilities, you can hypnotize locals, or shapeshift into human form to avoid detection. You can also use one of 4 weapons in the game, each handled very differently. The anal probe causes the victim's brain to explode out of their head, so you can collect and accumulate DNA, which is the game's main collectible resource, which also allows you to upgrade your weaponry back on the mothership. The Zap-O-Matic is a weapon which doesn't require ammo, but is only really useful against infantry units or humans on foot. The Disintegration Ray is pretty much a good all-round weapon, useful at taking out tanks, people, but it requires ammunition to work. The same goes for the Ion Detonator, which is basically the game's grenade launcher and provides some beautiful explosions. The guns have been well designed to give a wide variety of effects, and the weapons can be easily scrolled through using R2. They're not mapped to other confusing controls. You won't always be fighting on foot. There will be times when you need to take off in your flying saucer and either beam humans up or simply destroy key sites within a city or town. Likewise, you acquire ship weapons like the Death Ray or Quantum Deconstructor, most of which can be upgraded back at base for a DNA price as new upgrades become available. So what goes on in Destroy All Humans? Well, you complete missions in a linear fashion, but you can visit any settlement to take part in side challenges which earn you DNA to use to upgrade your weapons and powers. There are plenty of side challenges, and they're varied enough that if you're not good at one particular type, you can usually find something else that you're better at doing. So if you're not quite as good at the flying saucer missions, you can focus on those side missions which have you causing chaos on foot. You can also just go around causing absolute carnage until the military come out onto the street, if you like, with a wanted system similar to many sandbox games. There are also collectibles to walk over which increase your DNA stash. Fortunately, the game contains no mandatory collectibles. You don't have to collect these particular items. Neither do you have to complete the side missions. You can pretty much just stick to the main single player missions. The reason why you can do the side missions is just to gain a little bit more in the way of DNA so that you can upgrade your weapons. The upgrades don't cost so much that you'll concern yourself simply with level exploration and anal probing human subjects at the expense of the main single player mission. The story will probably take the player roughly 15 hours to complete and is about the right length, although the toughest mission in the game probably comes at around 60% of the way through. And I considered that so tough that I was really about to give up on this game. I did eventually barrel through it, but it was quite a long mission, and it made me wish that the game had an in-mission checkpoint system, even if all the other missions aren't really too problematic. What's nice about the missions is that there's quite a bit of variety, especially with those on foot, and you can sometimes choose to either take a more heavy-handed approach or opt for stealth. The voice work for the main part isn't great. There are times when the 2 main alien characters, and indeed some human characters, will say something genuinely funny, but don't expect this game to have you in stitches the whole way through. I feel that had the script writing been really well done, this game would have been infinitely better. As it is, the story isn't bad, and the voice acting, a little hit and miss. The towns at first feel huge and impressive. However, I think by the end of the game they feel a little bit underdone, and with a fair bit of pop-up, you can't admire them as much as you might do in other games. That said, it's completely understandable why the cities aren't quite as vibrant as in some sandbox city-based games, and that's because they were creating 6 different towns or cities which all had to be big enough for you to fly over in your flying saucer as well. So in all likelihood, the developers were strapped for how much time and attention they could give and how much detail they could put into these cities. They still look pretty decent at first, like I said, but they will seem a little vacuous later in the game. The mini-map is straightforward, with pink blobs on the map to show where the next mission objective is, and all the mission objectives were very clearly given. The music and presentation of the game all show a clear effort on the part of the developers to give an instantly recognizable 1950s America alien horror vibe. Playing this game feels very familiar because the developers probably watched dozens of old school 1950s black and white films, but also incorporated modern, more comedic elements of space aliens into the game. Destroy All Humans is a game that feels like it's had a lot of effort put into it. Now, before I reach my conclusion, I'm going to try and articulate my issues with the game. For me, Destroy All Humans it feels like another God of War. Not because Cryptosporidium137 spends his time hacking and slashing through the US populace, delivering cruel and gory finishes. It's nothing like God of War, except in the sense that it seems to me to be another well-made game that for some reason didn't really resonate with me when I was playing it. I don't attribute this to playing it years after the release, as I believe a good game is always good. A fun game is always fun, no matter how many years after release. It's crystal clear that the developers put a lot of work into getting every 1950s Cold War frenzied America and alien invaders cliché into this game, and it's better for it. The pedestrians are dressed in 1950s garb, the cars look fitting for the time, the newscast, the music is fitting. I could go on at length, but for some reason or another, I didn't get the fun out of this game that I was expecting. The graphics are impressive at times, particularly when you get a glimpse at sunsets and certain particle effects from weapons, and it's clear that this was developed much later in the PlayStation 2's life. The colour palette is suitably varied and the bright art style easy on the eye. Like I've said before, this is a technically well-made game. However, I was expecting to enjoy this game a lot, which makes my indifference towards it playing it, much as God of War, hard to pin down, and even now I look at the more action-packed footage and it still looks a lot of fun. And yet I can only really think it's the framing of the story, the characters, and the mission layout. I do think the story could have been told better, with more humour and better script writing injected into the characters and cinematics, but it's still a bit of a mystery to me why this game didn't resonate as much with me as I once hoped. My conclusion is this: Destroy All Humans is a fairly light-hearted action game. In technical terms, it looks pretty good, it has fitting music and sound effects, and includes almost every cliché from the last 60 years regarding alien invasions and a whole host of other things. And I say that in a good way, insofar as because it's light-hearted, it can make fun of those clichés. In some ways, it's quite an original game, as it looks to satirize a done-to-death film type in the medium of computer games. My issue with the game is that it felt a little bit hollow playing it. Perhaps I was expecting to find too much here. Perhaps I was expecting to find comedy gold within this game, and a more free-flowing mission style, with a cast of lively characters who could keep me entertained along the way. Certainly this is a game which isn't too frustrating, with one exception being that airfield mission, which I talked about, being around 2/3 of the way through the game, which did almost stop me playing completely. Perhaps this is a game that should have been played at the time, but I can't help thinking that with a lot more gags thrown in, with a more ludicrous storyline, and with the support cast of outrageously funny sidekicks, I'd have ended up giving this game an 8 score. In the end, I give Destroy All Humans a 6 out of 10. And that's me.